Two great speakers for you. We have Jodi McGraw and Kelli Camara. Jodi is a conservation ecologist whose work focuses on conserving rare and endangered species and promoting native biodiversity in sensitive natural communities in central coastal California. She has over 30 years of experience conducting ecological research, conservation, planning, and habitat protection, restoration and management projects in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Jodi helped develop the Santa Cruz County Regional Conservation Investment Strategy, that's RCIS for short, and also worked with conservation partners in the Bay Area to guide development of the RCIS program. And Kelli Camara has been involved in resource conservation and watershed protection on the Central Coast since 2001. Formerly with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Kelli brings with her knowledge of conservation planning, permitting, and project design and implementation. In 2012, Kelli was awarded a commendation by the County of Santa Cruz Board of Supervisors for facilitating the implementation of hundreds of voluntary restoration projects in Santa Cruz County. Kelli was part of a robust team of experts that developed the Santa Cruz County Regional Conservation Investment Strategy for the Regional Transportation Commission and Resource Conservation District of Santa Cruz County. Thank you, Kelli and Jodi.
Okay, great. I think we're going to be zooming way out relative to some of the prior talks that we learned a lot about some of the species to talk about more of the landscape. Okay, great. So I'll be telling you a little bit about the, first, anyone heard of the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy? All right, awesome. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program and the plan that was developed for Santa Cruz County, and then Kelli is going to tell us more about how it's being implemented, including in the San Lorenzo River Watershed. So the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy Program is a program developed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife about 10 years ago. So it's a relatively new program, and it's designed to really focus conservation investments in a regional scale on activities that are going to, things like habitat protection, restoration, enhancement, and species recovery actions, on things that will attain goals most effectively. So it can be used for a variety of purposes, including mitigation, but also a variety of voluntary projects like government grants, private philanthropy, and actions by many of the agencies and organizations represented in this room. So it was motivated, at least in part, to help provide more effective and efficient mitigation for public infrastructure agencies, transportation agencies, water districts, and others who are finding a hard time identifying valid, really important mitigation that could help in our landscapes. It was, as I mentioned, developed by CDFW, but with a lot of input from other agencies and organizations at the federal and state level, so to make sure that it's also going to meet their needs. So in 2019, the Santa Cruz RTC, the Regional Transportation Commission, received a grant to develop RCIS for Santa Cruz County and partnered with the Resource Conservation District, assembled our team to develop that. It took about over a 3-year process working with the community. We developed this countywide conservation plan. And it is important to note it's a voluntary, non-binding, non-regulatory program. So it was developed to complement other existing programs that are already up and running in our county, including habitat conservation plans and also mitigation banks. And it's primarily focused on natural resource conservation, biodiversity conservation, including for imperiled species, but also achieves a lot of other, we hope, ecosystem benefits. It's science-based and collaborative, and it's really, our RCS really focused on trying to provide uplift on existing protected lands, including our public lands as well as important private conservation lands. We had at the time in 2019 recognized that there was so much great conservation planning already that had been conducted, and so our RCIS really put together all that information into one package to make it easily accessible and really help bring it together for everyone. So the conservation blueprint for Santa Cruz County, developed by the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County a few years prior, is a key input, as are the many watershed plans, including watershed plans for the San Lorenzo River. The Integrated Water Resources Program. I won't read all of these, but you can get the idea that there's a lot of data synthesis and integration that we conducted. We had a steering committee that led a team of technical advisors and I think over 100 people, including many of you in the room today, that helped advise the plan in various capacities. We also had opportunities for stakeholder input and input by the public. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what's in the RCIS and hopefully maybe entice you to kind of check it out and use it as a resource for perhaps some of your work. There's this initial background chapter that tells you a little bit about more of the RCIS program and what it's trying to accomplish. Regional setting, then conservation elements, I'll go over these more. There are some pressures and stressors we identify. Conservation strategies are the heart of the RCIS, and finally we talk a little bit about implementation. So the regional setting section is really helpful if you ever find yourself in need of a description of Santa Cruz County and its fabulous biological resources. We really focus on trying to boil that down to some of the most salient information and provide a lot of references to all the literature that we reviewed and integrated. There's also a nice assessment of the land use in our county, including across the 4 cities as well as the county. So you might want to check that out. The heart of the RCIS is developing a conservation framework. And those conservation framework consists of identifying conservation elements. And conservation elements in this strategy are primarily our communities. So it's really, communities provide a really solid backbone for conservation across the county. So you can see here that our table, we have 13 natural communities that include communities that are sensitive, communities like the Santa Cruz Sandhills and the Maritime Chaparral and our karst caves. A lot of those that support special status species and high concentrations of other rare listed species, including our grasslands. But we also include more widespread communities like oak woodland and coast redwood forests, as these really stitch together and provide more cohesive conservation plan. So here's a map that shows that our natural communities that are addressed with a strategy in Santa Cruz County. As you can see, all the colored areas, it is pretty wall to wall, with exception of some of the more urban areas and also the more intensively agricultural areas like in the Pajaro Valley. For those, we have strategies that address working lands also, particularly agricultural lands, rangelands, and timber harvest lands as well. Those are obviously a really important part of not just biodiversity conservation, but also our economy and community. Habitat connectivity is a really important part of the RCIS as well. We heard from Senator Laird earlier about the San Andreas corridor. The connectivity section for the RCIS addresses the importance of maintaining connectivity between the Santa Cruz Mountains and adjacent mountain ranges, as well as maintaining permeability of habitat through Santa Cruz County, including connecting important patches of intact habitat and maintaining connections between them. In addition to communities, we develop strategies for what we call focal species. Focal species are primarily special status species, really threatened and endangered species under the state or federal act. You can see we selected a suite of species that range in the taxonomic representation, so we have plants all the way up to mammals. We chose species that primarily do require mitigation to help facilitate people using this plan for mitigation, but they're also focused on some of our locally unique species like Santa Cruz long-toed salamander and climate vulnerable species like marbled murrelet. These focal species are representative of the habitat needs for many what are called non-focal species. Non-focal species are species that are also often listed or special status species, but that, like I said, can benefit from the strategies for the focal species. So for example, if you have a strategy that promotes the Mount Herman June beetle from the Santa Cruz Sandhills, one of the non-focal species is Zayani bandwinged grasshopper, which will benefit from it as well. And these species, focal and non-focal species, are really the strategies plus for the communities are going to provide benefits for co-benefited species, which are 165 or 56 other plants and animals that are also going to benefit from these strategies. So once we had identified all our conservation elements, we assessed the pressures and stressors that are affecting them. So pressures are the anthropogenic and in some cases natural factors that are creating degraded ecological conditions, which are the stressors. So this table is just designed to illustrate it's a subset of what we addressed in the plan, but obviously these things like everything from development pressure to maybe aspects of incompatible recreation are all things that we address when developing the strategies. The strategies themselves have what we call the GOAP, the goals, objectives, actions, and priorities. Goals are what we want to see, what we want to achieve. The objectives are kind of the tools in the toolkit and how to use them. Actions are the very specific things you might do, and then the priorities are the things we'd like to accomplish in the first 10 years. The RCIS is an ongoing conservation plan designed to be updated every 10 years. So this is an example of what RCIS conservation strategy table looks like. It's just a little snippet of one for the sandhills. You can see just one of the goals, a couple of the objectives, actions, and the more focused priorities. For implementation section, we do talk about some ways to implement the RCIS, including facilitating coordination and collaboration, a lot of which is already happening fabulously in Santa Cruz County, just providing a shout out for more of the same. Identifying resources and funding opportunities to help facilitate the strategies, including things that have since come about, like Measure Q, which is fabulous. We identified monitoring and adaptive management strategies, and also discuss how to evaluate the success of the plan, and also do those every 10-year updates. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelli, who's going to tell you about some of the implementation of the RCIS to date.
Thank you, everyone. As Jodi mentioned, I'm going to talk about specifically how we've been using the RCIS to facilitate prioritizing and implementing conservation projects in the San Lorenzo River Watershed. To build on what Jodi just said, when we finished the RCIS, we recognized the next step is to take the GOAP, the goals, objectives, actions, and priorities, and move them over to a parcel level scale. So how could we identify and prioritize projects on the ground? How could we meet all these multi-objective opportunities in our projects? How could we document our efforts and successes and build on them? And most importantly, how can we meet with our partners, educate them, and bring them into the RCIS as a tool, sorry, thank you, to, again, like us, use this as a mechanism for identifying priority projects to implement with grant funding and also mitigation funding. So that's where it comes in with our partner, the City of Santa Cruz Water District. So the City of Santa Cruz needed to find mitigation projects for residual effects associated with ongoing water supply projects. And so they developed the Non-Flow Conservation Fund, or the NFCF, because we don't have enough acronyms. And the goal of the NFCF was to establish a fund to fund restoration and enhancement projects. A unique thing that the city did was, though, in their habitat conservation plan, they didn't identify what projects would be implemented as mitigation for these residual effects associated with water supply projects, nor did they specify where they were going to be implemented. So they were really looking for a tool of how do we identify priority projects on the ground. What the city did have is a list of priorities that they needed to do to meet the impacts associated with their residual projects. So this is just a list of what the city's priorities were. So because of where the impacts were located, the priorities were to make sure that their projects for mitigation resulted in benefits to Coho and Steelhead. The projects needed to address limiting factors and achieve recovery metrics that are identified by the agencies requiring mitigation, which are the National Marine Fisheries Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. The city really wanted to make sure that the projects had cumulative benefits, so looking at where other projects and investments had been employed in the county and building on those. They really wanted to make sure that they were addressing multiple objectives and tying their projects to ecological resilience. Obviously, projects needed to be implemented with landowner and stakeholder support, and needed to make sure there were no known constraints to implementation. And there needed to be a cost-benefit ratio to make sure we were directing our funds to the highest priority projects. The city also developed the NFCF to make sure that we could continue to adapt to new and emerging high priority issues within our county. So the program was developed with a lot of accountability, but also flexibility to allow us to do that. And the goal of developing the priorities were to work collaboratively with the RCD, those agencies requiring mitigation, and other agencies like the county and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to end up with a list of recommended projects. So what we did was we took the NFCF priorities, which were to basically address all life stages for steelhead and coho throughout the county, and we crosswalked them with the priorities listed in the RCIS. I can't see it because it's too small on the screen. So like Jodi mentioned, we had actions and priorities, and we looked for where there were opportunities to say, here are the city's priorities, and here are the places in the RCIS document where it references steelhead, coho, San Lorenzo River Watershed. And then we came up with a list of project activities that could be implemented that could address those conservation needs across the board. So for example, one of them is large wood eatery projects. So where in the county could we install large wood that would facilitate scour and pool habitat for salmonids, sediment sorting, cover, and you can see that for NFCF priorities, that basically addresses all life stages of steelhead and coho. In the RCIS, it's Action 19 in the riparian riverine section of the document. And it's prioritized for core areas that are identified in National Marine Fisheries Service recovery plans for the species. And like Jodi mentioned, the RCS has all of these additional focals, non-focal and co-benefited species. So we see that large wood, in addition to providing habitat for coho and steelhead, also benefits our amphibians and steelhead and other co-benefited species. Other project types that were identified were barrier removals, where we could remove relic dams that were impeding salmonid migration. These barriers also obstruct flow, minimize wood recruitment, sediment sorting, have other impacts, impact migration of other dispersal species. So this one was identified as also benefiting all stages of salmonid life cycles. You can see here in the RCIS, the priorities are in the San Lorenzo main stem with willing landowners, watersheds of coho and steelhead. And in general, we like to address barriers from the top of the watershed down, but we don't always have that opportunity. So thinking through how we can selectively improve migration when there's multiple barriers on our rivers and streams. We also identified the reconnection of floodplains as a high priority. That again, kind of through the same thought process, we see that it benefits coho, steelhead, and other species. And then lastly, riparian restoration was identified. So we have a lot of non-native plant species in our riparian areas, and how could we selectively address those to facilitate sapling establishment? A lot of these cover the ground, they're so aggressive. We don't have a lot of tree regeneration, which is important for our salmonids and stream health in the long term. So where could we put money in to really benefit habitat? And that leads to steelhead and coho recovery, as well as amphibian, reptiles, and in some cases, monarch recovery and other co-benefited species. So then we took this list of priority project types and we looked for something on the ground and came up with the project that we're going to implement this year in 2026, which is the removal of a relic dam on Branciforte Creek. This is known as the Old City Dam project. It was constructed in 1876 to provide water to a few connections in the Happy Valley area, but subsequently was abandoned in 1956. This relic dam was set up such that you would put flashboards in that gap, it would back up water, and then you could divert flow out of it. Like many of our dams, they were built on bedrock shelves, and they provide a lot of plunging over them that maintains these nice scour pools, which are a limiting factor in a lot of our streams for salmonids. So we worked with an engineering firm to design a project to address how this dam was impacting salmonid life stages and migration while still maintaining the habitat features that we like on the site. So the design is to remove the right bank side of the dam and the wing wall to improve fish passage while retaining the left side wing wall. So we protect the existing retaining wall, which might be historic. We're still working on cultural resources for the site. We're going to remove some of the sediment that's accumulated back behind the dam so it doesn't just fill in that nice scour pool that we have below the dam. We're going to create a pilot channel through the bedrocks to facilitate fish migration under low flows. We're going to place some large boulders over against the retaining wall to protect that retaining wall and also help move the thalweg of the stream back over to the center. We're going to install a large wood to facilitate pool scour over time as sediment moves through our system, and also do erosion control and revegetation. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Brian.
So if someone cared a lot about the San Lorenzo River, let's just say, and they were curious about what the RCIS might say about the river, would you just walk through a little bit about I think it's the river and riparian section of the RCIS. What might someone find there if they were looking at that document, curious about how to make the river home here?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so each section of the RCS strategies has a map that shows obviously where the reaches are and the different resources that are associated with them. We also summarize the protected status of all the land, which is kind of cool. So there's like a little almost snapshot of the state, and then the pressures and stressors are all identified, so you can kind of see, as Kelly mentioned, invasive plant species and obviously issues with in-stream habitat conditions that can be improved. And then it will have that massive table that was actually created by Jim Robbins, who's not here today, I don't think, but that is the compendium of all the prior watershed and stream restoration plans in it to give ideas, some very specific, this location on this reach, and some more general, like combat invasive plant species. And so the idea is you can kind of work within those general items and those specific items to hopefully identify some strategies to hit ground with.
I would just add to that, I use it in 3 ways. The first is looking at the natural community that I'm looking at, so looking at the recommendations for riparian and riverine. The second is looking for the geographic region, so San Lorenzo River Watershed, and then lastly, what species I'm either know I'm going to affect or I'm trying to recover.
And where can you find it?
Yeah, it's on the I know it's on the RCD website because you told me this morning, and it's probably on the RTC Santa Cruz probably website as well. Yes, we should have done the QR code. Sorry, but it should be a pretty easy Google search. And if you don't come up with it, please feel free to reach out to me or the RCD. Sorry about that. Yeah, the question is we plan to include the near coast environment in the analysis. And we did have a beaches, dunes, and near coast. I think the RCS is definitely primarily a terrestrial plan, I would say, aquatic and terrestrial wetlands. But we did talk about in the beaches, dunes, and near coastal strand strategy about the importance of the near coast environment and the stressors on it. So I think if people want to sort of expand on that and run with it, I'm sure it would be great to have that as a companion. Any more questions? Okay, well, thank you.